Hi everyone, if you're new to the channel, welcome. If you like the content, please consider subscribing. So I want to talk about travel in today's video. I feel that I've been quite fortunate in life. I've been able to travel a fair bit. There's still a lot of places that I want to see, but I've been fortunate enough to travel a fair bit. I'm approaching my 40th birthday in about a week, and I feel at this point in my life, I've travelled quite a lot, but there's still a lot of places I would like to see, and I hope I am indeed able to see them. I'll say from the top of this video, I believe that travel is an achievement. If it's a choice as opposed to being displaced by unforeseen events, I think that travel is something that if you have the opportunity, you should take it up. Even if it doesn't seem like a very exotic location, it's still a new place. Now, within the UK, I'm well travelled. I've been to most of our big cities. I haven't been to some of the southern coastal cities. Never been to Plymouth, Portsmouth, Southampton. I've not been to the south of Wales, Cardiff, Swansea, East Anglia, not so much. I've not been to Norwich, but I have been to Cambridge. And there's a number of other locations I haven't been to. Haven't been to Aberdeen. Um, so there's a few other places, Chester, I haven't been to. Apparently, it's well worth visiting. A Ukrainian woman I know is taking the opportunity now while she's here to travel around the country, and she has an interest in history. So I'm pleased to see she's doing that because actually British cities do have a lot of history, and there's a lot of layers to them that you may not always see on the surface. London I've been to numerous times, Edinburgh numerous times. When I was studying in the West Midlands, I went to Birmingham quite a few times. So I'm fairly well travelled around the UK. And obviously, I'm from Northern Ireland, so there's a lot of little towns and villages around Northern Ireland that I went to as a child. Um, I'm pretty well travelled around Europe, but there's still locations I haven't been to. In my life, I can work out about 15 independent countries that I've been to. Now, I'm not including the four nations of the UK. Let's count the UK as one. Basically, I have been to the Republic of Ireland numerous times. I've been to the Netherlands 6 times because my father worked for a while in Rotterdam. I've been to Belgium twice, France twice, Germany 3 times, Czechia, Czech Republic twice, Austria once, Italy once, Greece twice, the Greek islands of Crete and Rhodes, Turkey once, that was on the same trip as the Rhodes trip. I don't think I've been to the Vatican State. I've been at St. Peter's Square, but I don't know if I actually crossed the boundary into the Vatican State. Um, I've never been to Spain or Poland within Europe or Scandinavia. Those are definitely locations I'd like to see, or maybe the Balkans outside of Greece. I've not been there. Um, I've been to North America, the United States, and Canada back in 1999, and I'll come back to that. And I've been to the Far East, China twice, and the Philippines. So I think that's about 15 countries. Now, this will be a slightly longer video because there is a number of things I want to include. I want to include pros, cons, and my thoughts on the general idea of travel. So bear with me. Multitask. So often when I'm listening to videos, I do the dishes. So I know that some people, their approach is to make very condensed videos, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Honestly, the reason I don't do that is just because I don't feel I can include what I want to include in that sort of frame of time in most of my videos. So yeah, please bear with me. Um, I'm going to start off with why make this video? Well, what gave me the idea for this was a show that I've been watching with my mum called Race Around the World on the BBC. And basically, the concept is it starts off with 5 or 6 couples, and I don't mean romantic couples. This could be father-son teams, mother-daughter teams, friends, siblings, and yeah, sometimes romantic couples. But you have 6 people in competition, 6 groups of people in competition, and the basic premise is they start off at one location and they have to get to another. And there's checkpoints about 5 or 6 checkpoints along the way. So, as an example, the last series we watched started off at the Great Wall of China and ended up at the southern tip of India. And the general idea is that there's a challenge involved because they're not allowed to use mobile phones and they're not allowed to take planes. So they're not allowed to fly except in extenuating circumstances. The series that showed South America, so it's basically from Latin America, Mexico City to the very southern tip of Argentina. There were some exceptional circumstances there. The BBC allowed them to fly because at the time there were protests sweeping around the world in 2019, and they physically couldn't go into Ecuador or Bolivia, which was initially on the schedule. So they had to then take alternative plans, and they were allowed to fly for that part. But the interesting thing about the show is often people had their own personal challenges in the relationships, maybe some misunderstandings or some background things. So it was as much a personal journey in that sense. It was certainly challenging, and it showed where travel can be a challenging experience. More often than not, you had contestants breaking down because it just became too much. There was one young woman and her boyfriend, they were in India, and the taxi driver brought them the wrong way. Maybe he misunderstood, or maybe he was just deliberately trying to get a higher fare. Who knows? But the young woman found it all overwhelming, and she basically broke down in tears. Just the buzz of noise and just everything. It's like sensory overload. Um, there was another guy that had health problems, and he collapsed at one point. Um, Two British Indian guys, or excuse me, British Pakistani guys who won the South American series. They actually donated half of their winnings because they won the show to various charities across South America because they were really moved by what they saw from street children in Sao Paulo in Brazil. So they donated half of their earnings to charity. If the winners get £20,000, so that's the incentive. But it's an interesting show. If you get the chance to see it, I do recommend it. It just shows the sort of challenges that people have, and people have to step outside their comfort zone, like approach strangers for help, and a lot of people don't have the confidence to do that. So it just shows that's one thing with travel. Now, what I'm going to do is get into the negative and the positive of travel and my experience, and this is going to be. I'm not going to go really, really comprehensive. I'm just going to cite some things. So I think as a general thing with travel, you need to be very assertive. If you're going to another country, even if it's a neighbouring country, even if it's another Western country, I think you just need to be a little bit more aware of your surroundings. You just need to be a bit more savvy because, I mean, we often take it for granted in Britain English is the international language, and it is true a lot of people speak English, but some don't. And also, if you're going to a place that isn't necessarily a tourist location, and I've been in that situation a few times. For example, I was in the Czech city of Brno. It's the second city there. I wouldn't call it a particularly tourist place. So, there was no translations into English. So situations like that where you really do have to be quite savvy and where it is useful to speak a bit of the local language. I actually had a situation in Brno, before I forget, whereby I got on the public trans system there, and a guy came up to me and showed me this little medallion thing. And my first instinct was he was trying to sell it, and I said, no, no. And the guy got angry, and I said, no, I don't want it. What the hell? It turned out he was actually the ticket inspector, but he had no uniform. So I'm thinking, well, how did I know you're the ticket inspector? Um, Having said that, Brno had great views. It's quite a hilly city, and it had great views over the place. And I always feel good in a sense in going places which aren't tourist spots because I feel like there's not that many British tourists will have been here before, so that's something. I don't know, maybe the situation in Brno is different now. This is way back in 2006, so it might be different now. Um, that was only a couple of years after Czechia joined the European Union, so maybe things are quite different now. Anyway, I I've had other travel challenges, and I find that you just can't approach travel like you would traveling around your own country. But then even your own country, if it's a big country like the United States, if you live in, I don't know, rural Georgia, if you're going to California, things are going to work differently, right? If you're in rural South Dakota, and you go to New York City, if you're in Miami and you go to Idaho, etc. So bigger countries, perhaps that rule applies. Um, but I find that is very, very important. It's one piece of advice I would give. Just be assertive. I'm not saying you need to be fluent in the language of the country that you're in, but just be aware that things will work slightly differently. Um, I've had situations that have required a lot of patience, and what I find is whilst it's a very human emotion, losing your temper just doesn't really help. So I find that where I would lose my temper in the UK, I wouldn't necessarily in other countries because I'm a bit more flexible, or I try to be. Let me give an example. I would not lose my temper, that's an exaggeration, but I think sometimes British transport isn't as flexible as it could be. So our railways, I really think that they can improve significantly. Let me give an example. I've been in a situation where I missed my train, and it was Newcastle to Edinburgh. Now, it was probably my own fault, so I'm not the sort of person that blames that on other people. But there is a lack of flexibility. I had a ticket, and thankfully, the ticket inspector was lenient that day. She said, "Well, you have a ticket. I should charge you for another ticket," but she didn't. But really, I mean, what? Why? If someone has paid for a ticket and the seats aren't full and they're on the same route, I really don't know why there shouldn't be some flexibility there. I can understand if the train is busy, but that wasn't the case on that occasion, and maybe that's why she indeed resisted giving me the fine. It would have been a £50 fine. Now in China, I had the exact opposite experience. Again, I'd missed my train, I'd misunderstood the board. That was my fault. I wasn't blaming anyone else for that. Because actually, Chinese public transport's pretty well, they have English translations. It's pretty straightforward. Well, fairly straightforward. But whatever, I missed my train. I was in the city of Wuhan, and I was going on a long distance journey, and I missed it, so I got quite anxious. I had to phone up my friend that I'd met that day. She came back to the station and helped me out. And what had actually happened was I assumed, okay, I'm going to have to dish out a lot of money for a new ticket. No. All that happened was I just simply got on the next train. It was the same route, and I just had to show the ticket. So that was a big relief. In the UK, I would have had to buy another ticket. So you do find different countries have different ways of doing it. Often in the continent, what I find in transit systems is even once you buy a ticket, it's not valid until you physically get it stamped in the station. In Germany, in I believe it's in the Netherlands as well, there's a little stamp machine, and you sort of slot the ticket in, and it automatically stamps it. If you don't do that, the ticket isn't valid, which to me is a bit odd because surely they'll see that you've bought the ticket. And the date and all's on it. But anyway, that is the rule. Um, my most recent bar one trip abroad, and I've been to one other location since then, but I was in Berlin, December 2023. And I had an experience there whereby I was in Berlin Brandenburg Airport. Now, you would think a major European capital would have direct access to the city centre, but from what I gathered, they only had the sort of mainline trains. There wasn't a rapid transit system connection to central Berlin, which I thought was odd. Um, and yet, in the case of Germany, there's a comprehensive transport system there, but I was in Dusseldorf back in 2015, and what actually happened was I mean, I was loosely aware there was the U-Bahn, there was the S-Bahn, and I was just trying to work out how do I get to. I'd obviously missed something, but I ended up just walking to where I wanted to be. I thought, well, this will take in part of the city, but I like using underground systems, so I was disappointed not to get to use that. Um, I was getting a little bit disillusioned because I thought, am I lost? I mean, okay, I'm taking in the city, I'm getting some good pictures, but at some point I want to see some attraction. I want to get into a coffee shop or something. Eventually, I ended up in the city centre, and it was worth it. There was, beautiful views over the Rhine. I went to an old beer pub. I'm not sure if we call it a beer tavern in that part of Germany, but anyway, it was worth seeing. Um, but that night, there was a train cancelled, and I ended up having to take six different services. And this was November. It was pretty cold, and at that time there was a large influx of migrants to Europe. So there was police on the train, sort of assessing if anyone was getting on the train um, without without permission, and it was just a long night. And the thing there was the company in the Netherlands that had sold my dad the ticket. He wanted to get a refund, and they said you could fill in the form online when it happened, but that to me was inflexible because I'm thinking, A, I'm in another country, and B, I'm in a train station. You want me to write the complaint form there? I suppose this gets into the fact that a lot of people use smartphones, but I didn't, and I just felt it wasn't that flexible. So for me, I mean, maybe I'm biased just because I don't have the advantage of having an up to date smartphone, but I feel that um, there should be some flexibility around that, especially when you consider older people who may not use them that much. Um, I find one of the stressful things about travel is baggage. If you're on a long haul flight, for me, the concern is always, will they lose my bag? And although statistically it's not that highly likely to happen, it does happen. And it's happened to me about 3 times. The last time it happened, I was going to the Philippines. I had 3 flights, 2 long haul flights, Newcastle to Dubai, Dubai to Singapore, both on Emirates, and then a shorter flight from Singapore to Manila on a company called Jetstar Asia. And lo and behold, they lost my case. Now, it turned out that I mean, at the time I wasn't even angry. I sort of resigned myself to it. It was a nuisance, but I thought, okay, that's the situation. And what I'd actually been anxious about was if you go to the Philippines, you get visa free travel, but you need to fill in an e travel document online. And I was actually anxious about that. I thought, well, have I done it right? Will they accept it? It turned out they didn't even really check that. But the bag was lost, and what actually happened was they knew which flight it was on. They apologized, but because it would have been impractical to go to my girlfriend's hometown and then go all the way back to Manila the next day, we decided to stay in Metro Manila in Makati City. And I sort of reasoned, well, this is an inconvenience brought about by the airline, so really they should pay for the hotel, and they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't pay out. So apparently that company is now defunct. But I find that because their argument was we did return your case, but they weren't factoring in the inconvenience that it caused and the extra financial burden of having to get that hotel. So I think there's times airlines could be more flexible than they are. I mentioned Race Around the World. By the way, that initially started off as a Chinese show years ago, whereby participants actually started in China and came to the UK. But anyway, another show that I've been watching recently is Airline, which was popular in the UK in the 2000s. And it was basically about EasyJet, which is a low cost airline in the UK, very widely used here. And it was very often about confrontations between passengers and staff about things that had went wrong. Now, most of the time, I did think, okay, that's just the passenger being entitled, or it's entirely their own fault. For instance, they would turn up late to check in, and they'd have this ridiculous idea, but the plane is just there. Why can't you let us on? And they would seem to think that a plane is the same as a bus. They don't factor in why the pilot has to consider weight and timelines and all that sort of thing. So more often than not, it was their own fault. However, there were times I thought the show was a bit biased towards EasyJet. For instance, there was one episode called Entitled Father Gets Angry, but the man I was expecting really unreasonable person. What actually happened was the man had phoned up EasyJet, explained that there was a delay on National Railways, and asked would his seat be guaranteed, and he was told that he had a guarantee from someone on the phone from EasyJet. Now, when he turned up, they said, sorry, sir, the seat isn't there. So why did they give him that guarantee? That isn't being unreasonable. I think he had every right to be frustrated in that situation. Um, another thing the airlines do is this practice of overbooking, and they do it to balance out the fact that some people just don't show up, so the airline loses money. But they then penalise people who have showed up, and they say, sorry, you just need to get on the next flight, but they don't seem to care about the inconvenience that causes those passengers. If they're meeting someone on the other side or something. So I think that's a practice that needs to be abolished. Um, Deliberately overbooking and then inconveniencing other passengers. If there is loss from people not showing up, surely they can make up for that by just finding those passengers who don't show up, something like that. I think it's unfair to take it out on other passengers. So I think the aviation industry, like the railway industry in the UK, can sometimes be more flexible. One does believe, or is led to believe, that they once they've got their profit, that's all they really care about. Having said that, I do find that when I've been on long haul flights, I feel my trust level for long haul flights is quite high because generally I've had a good experience. Emirates, China Southern, China Eastern, Malaysia Airlines, um, I don't think I've had a major problem off the top of my head with any of those airlines. Certainly when I was on Emirates, Emirates has a good reputation, and I can see why. It's wonderful in-flight entertainment. I mean, I wonder about the days before sort of the inbuilt screen. You know, if you were on a 8 hour, 9 hour, 10 hour flight, yeah. Apparently, there's a fad recently, a sort of social media trend where people go on a long haul flight and they deliberately they don't watch any entertainment. They won't even have the customary food on the plane. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. If you've paid for a ticket, why on earth wouldn't you take advantage of the perks with that? It's crazy. I mean, that to me is something that only wealthy people would do because, yeah, I really don't get that. There was a name for it, which I forget off the top of my head. And then there's the question of how do you prove it? You could easily just record the beginning of the flight and the end of the flight and say, oh, look, I'm not watching the screen. No, I couldn't do that. Um, Travel, of course, is something that has changed over time. You know, in this country, in the Victorian Edwardian periods, we had resort towns open up, places like Brighton, Blackpool, Hastings. They would open up as a way for city workers, industrial workers, to get away for a short time, and that developed. Then by the mid 20th century, you had the jet set, which tended to be associated with the rich and famous, but that sort of moved away. And by the 1960s, ordinary people could afford package holidays to Spain. So for the first time, they could really travel abroad. Whereas in the past, continental holidays would be a domain of diplomats, aristocrats, and so on. You know, in Lord Byron's day, a trip to Italy was kind of the thing for the upper class. That was the part of the London season. They'd go to Italy, I believe, as part of that. Or maybe not the London season, but it would be very much part of that aristocratic lifestyle. Now, it's relatively easy for anyone to do. So definitely the dynamics of travel have changed a lot. Like I say, 1960s onwards, Spain, still a popular location. It wouldn't be my cup of tea. I do not like the idea of going to a Spanish resort surrounded by other Britons drinking a lot. It's not my idea of a nice holiday. But I'd like to see the real Spain. I'd like to see, you know, Spain's really rich in cultural, the art I'm thinking of. So I'd like to see Madrid. Within Europe, I've been to many of our great cities. I've been to Paris, I've been to Rome, I've been to Berlin, but there is still many places to see. I often hear, young people, not necessarily young people, but some of them have been young, this idea of traveling to every country in a year or two. And you see these videos like, she traveled to every country on earth on this budget or something. I think that's a huge achievement and it's impressive. But my thing is, well, okay, you're in your early 20s, you've been to every country on earth, although sometimes I'm a little bit, I question how authentic these cases are. But even if it's a lot of countries, it's kind of ruining the excitement for later in life. Why not space it out and have something to look forward to? If you've been to every country on earth by the age of 23, then all you really can do after that is go to them again. So I wonder really what's the point. I mean, I'm a realist. I know I'm not going to be in every country on earth in my lifetime. It isn't going to happen. I do hope, I feel privileged to be where I've been so far, but there's places that I would still like to see. Um, so definitely being assertive and being aware that things can go wrong on travel is something that is just a fact of life. Sometimes your case can be lost. It's frustrating. Sometimes you could be screwed over. Now this can happen anywhere in the world. It's happened in the UK. I have Asian friends who were ripped off by taxis in London. But it certainly happened to me. And it is frustrating. It is an unpleasant feeling to feel that you've been taken advantage of. Um, Particularly when you feel powerless, because very often by the time you realize this happened, the person who cheated you is long gone. It happened to me several times in China, but one of those occasions I got on a coach and I paid 60 RMB, which is about £6. And I thought that's reasonable. It's a 2 hour journey. Yeah, that's fine. And I looked around me and people were paying 20 RMB. Now, the woman who sold me the ticket was already long gone. So I couldn't really complain. It was just that sense of being cheated is not a pleasant feeling. In China, often my Chinese friends would almost be overprotective of me because they knew there was a chance of this happening, and I think their logic was if they were there, it was less likely to happen. Likewise, when I've been with international friends in the UK or even strangers, I've taken it on myself. If I'm leaving Newcastle Airport, I've often seen travellers from other parts of Europe, and they're looking at the metro map, and it's fairly straightforward. But I'll sort of offer to help just because it's the way I would like to be treated. So empathy is a very important thing. Um, but one advantage we have in the northeast is the Tyne Metro, and honestly, I used to complain about it. People complain about it, but honestly, we're lucky to have it. It's not ideal. The timetable is definitely not always accurate, but and sometimes it breaks down. The rolling stock is quite old. However, we have a direct link from Sunderland City Centre to Newcastle Airport. Not everywhere has that. Other conurbations at Greater Manchester, I think maybe there is a train to Manchester Airport, but Leeds Bradford, as far as I know, if you live in Leeds or Bradford city centres, the only way to get to that airport is by taxi, which is not cheap. So, other parts of the country, we don't have that advantage of having a direct metro link, and we have it here. So, I remember when I went to Berlin. Berlin now is served by one major airport. It used to be three smaller airports, and the curious thing there was it's sort of Berlin Brandenburg. It's outside the administrative jurisdiction of Berlin. It's in the state of Brandenburg. So there's a mainline connection, and yet there isn't a direct link, by rapid transit. I thought that was unusual. So had the person not been meeting me, I honestly wouldn't really have known what to do. My German is very limited, so yeah. Um, when I went to Manila, I was met there by my girlfriend. We in the Philippines, the way it works is jeepneys are a popular form of transport between cities, and I love the jeepneys. They're very unique. They're sort of converted jeep vehicles. The other thing was you get tricycles, which are really electronic motorbikes with a bit at the side. But for long distance, it's basically hired vehicles. You basically hire a driver. It's not even a taxi. It's like, and I asked my girlfriend, is there not a safety issue with this? I mean, how do you know the person is, do they not need a license or something? But that's the way it works in the Philippines. There is a railway system there, but it's underused. Metro Manila, I believe, has a metro system. I don't know how widely that's used. Um, it's still in some ways a developing country, so there's still some things developing in terms of infrastructure. I'm going to wrap this up soon, but even with all the stresses that come from travel, it's something that I really, really recommend. One of my early perceptions of travel, and it was an early perception of China, was a movie called Inn of the Sixth Happiness. And it basically chronicled the experiences of the missionary Gladys Aylward. Now, granted, this is an old Hollywood film, 1958, I believe it was made, and it was filmed in Snowdonia in Wales. The Chinese children were from Chinatown in Liverpool, and you had Ingrid Bergman playing Gladys Aylward. She looked nothing like Gladys Aylward. They also brought in a love story that didn't exist. So it was very Hollywood. Nevertheless, I think it's a good movie. It's engaging. And in those days, she had to go across the Russian landmass. And in the nationalist controlled China, it was definitely not a comfortable experience. Um, I often wonder about whatever you think of them, those early missionaries were very brave. I mean, you cannot tell me they weren't brave to go into a situation where they may have been treated in a hostile way, taking a great risk to do so. I think of, I was going to say Hudson, actually, the first missionary in China was, frustratingly, his name eludes me off the top of my head. It will come to me. But he was from the northeast actually, but to go outside the comfort zone at a time when there was no internet, no television, the world was not connected. This was before the space race. Those early explorers, those early missionaries, I do think whatever you think of them, you had to have pluck to do that. Really, I mean, even today you need a certain degree of pluck to travel long distance, but today at least we have a lot of connections, and it's just I think it was a whole other experience doing that back then. It was quite something. But I really do think travel is a worthwhile experience. Now, I don't want to go much beyond the half hour mark, so I'm just going to wrap this up. I've had a lot of very positive experiences. In this video, I deliberately haven't went into details with each individual experience, but if anyone wants to ask me about any of those specific countries, I'll be happy to answer. Like I say, a lot of countries in Europe, plus Canada, the United States, um, China, and the Philippines. China was largely work, but I did travel a lot when I was there as well. The United States was actually a situation whereby, at the time, 1999, my father and my brother and myself were into the Civil War, and we'd had some visitors from the small town of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania, historic site of the Gettysburg Address and the famous battle. And they proposed a sort of exchange whereby the local rector would stay there and my father would go to his parish. In the end, I don't think he came to Northern Ireland, but we did stay in his house and he was somewhere else at the time. And basically, we were there for a month. Locals were very friendly. One thing I remember well was the American motels. And I remember my parents told me and my brother off because kept taking the free coffee. And they said, these are small businesses, don't take advantage of their generosity. And they were right, we were being, I was 13 at the time. We took a trip to Niagara Falls, so that's why I included Canada. Wonderful experience. I do remember the mist sort of coming over, and that was quite an experience. The Philippines, I'm going to show you this little fridge magnet. Villa Escudero. It's basically a Spanish sort of colonial plantation house, and it is like that. It's a pink facade, um, and it's basically, I wouldn't call it a theme park, but there were a lot of things rolled into one. There was a museum. There was a hydroelectric dam built by the entrepreneurs in the family, and you could get caribou rides. A caribou is a sort of bovine animal, like a small dairy cow, but it's bulky, big, strong animal, and you can ride on them basically like a horse. Well, not directly, but they pull a cart. Strong animals. That was a worthwhile experience. I also went to a place called Hesuna, or let me pronounce this right in the Spanish pronunciation, because although Spanish isn't actually an official language of the Philippines, but they borrow a lot of words from it. Jesus, that's Jesus. I forget off the top of my head. But anyway, it's a large statue of Christ on the top of a hill, and as you go up the hill, it's the scenes of the crucifixion. So it's that was definitely an interesting thing to see. The buffets I had in the Philippines are the best I've ever had. Large buffets, every type of food imaginable. There's many other positive experiences I've had. I'm going to wrap this up, but what I would simply say is this: if you have an opportunity in life to travel, obviously money has to be factored in. You have to have an up to date passport. I don't right now, so I can't travel until I sort that out. But if you could do those things, I would say do it. But make sure you do your homework. Make sure you check what are the customs in that country, what are the taboos, what aren't the taboos. I do think it's useful to speak a bit of the language, even if you consider English as an international language. It's just practical, and always be aware of your surroundings. And I say just go for it. I hope to travel to other locations. One place I haven't been to is definitely somewhere I've always wanted to see is India. It's just something, a place that I have wanted to see since childhood. I think it comes from, I'm a big lover of film. I remember seeing The Secret Garden when I was a child, and that starts off with little spoiled girl Mary Lennox. She's in colonial era India under the Raj, and yeah, just the idea as a child, it was India and China were fascinating to me. Those two specific places, and I've been to one of them now twice. So India is somewhere I need to see. Um, Other countries in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Indonesia, perhaps. Japan and South Korea, I do want to see both those countries. Within Latin America, a lot of people talk about Brazil, and of course, if someone gave me a ticket to Brazil, I take it. But actually, in South America, I don't know why, but it's always been Peru that has taken my interest. It could be because I used to know a missionary and she went there. And I remember she sent me a letter back from there. It was in a sort of children's Christian group I was in at the time. And she went to Peru and she sent me back that letter. I've always wanted to see the Balkans, like maybe Bosnia. Um, one of those countries. I know they're a bit volatile, but certainly they wouldn't be. They'd be safer now than during the Balkan Wars. But I appreciate they're volatile. Nevertheless, I would like to see Bosnia at some point. Within the United States, I've been to the US, but the only big city we were there, what we visited was Baltimore. I do want to see New York City. I do want to see Los Angeles. Because of my interest in history, I have this thing about seeing the presidential libraries. I'd love to see each of them. I'd also like to see, if I was in Dallas, the Sixth Floor Museum. You know, it's that interest in history. And I do this thing where I'd love to see every contiguous state, all 50 of them, all 48 of them, plus Hawaii and Alaska, so be it. But just, you know, the idea, I've got a Starbucks mug from Louisiana. I've never been there, but my brother and his wife lived there for a while and they got me that. Within the United States, I've been to New York, Virginia, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Maryland. So those are the 5 states I've been to. Right, I'm going to wrap this up. It is a longer video, but I think this was all necessary. Travel is a wonderful thing. Yes, there is stresses involved. Yes, it requires a lot of patience. Yes, it requires sometimes tough skin and a little bit of pluck. But if you can do it, I really, really recommend it. I would also say don't don't hesitate to go a little bit outside your comfort zone. Don't just go to tourist places. You know, if you're in a city, explore a little bit. I'm not saying be reckless. You know, be assertive. Take a phone, take a map, which is probably on your phone, but just be assertive. But you know, I always find I've been to places, I've been in parts of rural China, I know for a fact are not tourist spots. And I'm very, very grateful for that because I know that is not somewhere everywhere else has been to. So people say, oh, did you go to the Great Wall of China? And of course, it would be wonderful to see, but no, I didn't. And I don't feel huge regret in that because I know that I went to places that most other Westerners haven't been to. So that to me is a special thing. Anyway, I'll wrap this up. Let me know your thoughts on travel. Where have you been to? Where would you like to go? There are certainly locations I'd like to see again that maybe I would appreciate more the second time around. But there's many, many other locations I haven't been to that are definitely on my to do list. Countries I'd like to see: Mexico, Peru, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, probably Egypt, but I don't know if I could handle the heat there. Not Dubai, I have to be honest, that doesn't appeal to me. I've been in Dubai airport. My impression from the Gulf states is not wonderful. I have to be honest about that. So, you know, I'm being candid in this video. There's places I'd be less inclined to go out of my way to visit. The African continent I've never been to. Um, People also talk about Australia, and I'm sure Australia would have many interesting points, but to me, it's just too similar to the UK. You know, it's a Western culture, it's English speaking. If someone gave me a free ticket to Australia, of course I would go. But my logic is you're traveling that far, and really the culture's not that different. There's some differences, but not radically different. So to me, going to Vietnam or indeed the Philippines or somewhere in Southeast Asia is more exciting because it's different. It's yeah. Um, Thailand I've never seen. That will probably be on my to do list. So okay, I'll wrap this up. Let me know your thoughts on travel. Where have you been? Where would you like to go? And thanks for watching.